Four airline crew vanished after a routine flight in 2001. 24 years later, a tree cave revealed why. The sun had barely risen, and a soft golden light spilled across the runways, reflecting off the metal of waiting aircraft. Flight 247 was scheduled to depart at 6:30 a.m., a short journey to a nearby international hub. For most travelers and even the airline staff, it was just another routine flight, one of many that took off and landed without incident every day. But for the four crew members on board, it would be anything but ordinary. Captain Robert Hayes, a man in his late 40s with decades of experience in the cockpit, arrived at the airport with calm confidence. He had flown countless flights in his career and prided himself on his attention to detail and composure in emergencies. His co-pilot, Daniel Morris, a younger man in his early 30s, was eager and diligent, learning from every flight alongside Robert. Together, they made a reliable team, trusted by both passengers and airline management. The two flight attendants, Sarah Collins and Maria Vega, arrived shortly after. Sarah was known for her warm smile and professional demeanor. She had a way of making nervous passengers feel safe and comfortable, a skill that came from years of handling a wide variety of travelers. Maria, younger but equally experienced, was always alert and attentive, quick to notice any unusual behavior or situation on board. Both women had formed a close friendship over the years, often joking about how they could read each other's minds during long flights. That morning, the crew went through their usual pre-flight routines. The pilots reviewed the flight plan, checked weather reports, and conducted thorough inspections of the aircraft systems. Nothing in the reports suggested any danger. The weather was clear, the aircraft had passed all safety checks, and the passengers had boarded without incident. Everything seemed ordinary, calm, and perfectly normal. As Flight 247 pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, airport staff waved and wished the crew a smooth flight. Families waved goodbye, travelers settled into their seats, and a sense of normalcy hung in the air. Robert and Daniel communicated with air traffic control, confirming takeoff clearance. The engines roared to life, and the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the sky. At first, everything appeared routine. The plane climbed steadily, leaving the city behind. Passengers gazed out of the windows at the waking world below, noting the patchwork of fields, rivers, and forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the cabin, Sarah and Maria moved through the aisles, attending to passengers, offering drinks and exchanging friendly smiles. The conversation was light, the atmosphere calm. It was, in every way, an ordinary flight, as ordinary as any other. But a few minutes into the journey, a subtle sense of unease began to form. It was so slight that most passengers would not have noticed it, a minor flicker in the lights, a faint hum from the engines, a chill in the air. For the crew, trained to observe even the smallest irregularities, there was a quiet awareness that something, however minor, was not quite right. They shared brief glances, but nothing alarming had occurred, and they continued with their duties, confident that it was likely just a minor fluctuation in the aircraft systems. As the plane approached a dense stretch of forest far from the nearest city, the first signs of trouble appeared on the radar screens at air traffic control. A slight irregularity, a blip that wavered and then disappeared. Controllers attempted to contact Flight 247 using the standard radio channels, but there was no response. At first, it was assumed to be a technical glitch, a momentary loss of signal, but as minutes passed, the concern grew. Multiple attempts to reach the crew yielded only silence. Back on the aircraft, no one had yet noticed anything unusual. The pilots monitored the instruments, unaware of the increasing worry on the ground. Sarah and Maria continued their rounds, ensuring that passengers were comfortable, oblivious to the alarm building in the control tower. Outside the windows, the dense forest stretched below, unbroken and serene, a landscape untouched by human interference. It seemed peaceful, yet beneath that tranquility lay the beginnings of a mystery that would haunt the world for decades. When the plane was expected to land at the destination airport, anxiety turned to alarm. Air traffic controllers tried repeatedly to establish contact. They alerted nearby aircraft to assist, scanning the skies for any sign of Flight 247. Search and rescue teams were mobilized, their helicopters slicing through the morning sky, their crews scanning the terrain below. Yet despite their efforts, there was no sign of the plane. No debris, no smoke, no crash site, nothing. Families of the crew and passengers were informed that the flight was missing. For relatives, the news was a shock, a disbelief that quickly turned into despair. They clung to hope, praying that the crew and travelers were safe, perhaps delayed or stranded somewhere. But as hours turned into days, that hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing fear that something far worse had occurred. News outlets covered the story extensively, broadcasting images of the 4 crew members, recounting their experience, their dedication, their lives. Robert Hayes was remembered as a calm and courageous pilot. Daniel Morris, young and ambitious, had been seen as a rising star in aviation. Sarah Collins and Maria Vega were celebrated for their professionalism and kindness. The public was captivated, horrified, and sympathetic, drawn to the human faces behind the mysterious disappearance. Speculation ran rampant. Some theorists suggested mechanical failure, a sudden catastrophic event that had caused the plane to vanish. Others proposed that a powerful storm might have swept the aircraft off course. A few, more imaginative voices suggested conspiracies or secretive government interventions. Yet despite countless investigations, the truth remained out of reach. The plane seemed to have disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions and grief. Search missions extended for weeks, then months, covering rivers, mountains, and dense forests. Specialists used the most advanced technology available at the time, scanning every inch of the suspected flight path. Still, no evidence of Flight 247 or its passengers emerged. The forest seemed to have swallowed the plane whole, as if it had never existed. Among the families, life continued amid the uncertainty. Parents, siblings, spouses, and children clung to memories, photographs, and mementos, unwilling to give up hope. The airline faced scrutiny, questioned about safety protocols and emergency procedures. Aviation experts debated the case, analyzing every piece of data, yet none could explain the vanishing. Over time, some relatives began to accept the possibility that the crew had perished, while others refused to believe that the plane could simply vanish. The forest where Flight 247 disappeared became a symbol of mystery, danger, and nature's unpredictable power. Local residents told stories of strange lights and sounds in the area, folklore that grew with each passing year. The tale of the missing crew entered the annals of aviation history, a case study in how even routine flights could end in inexplicable tragedy. Yet despite the despair, the world did not forget Flight 247. Memorials were quietly held, small gatherings to honor the crew and passengers, their lives, and the bravery they had shown by simply being professionals dedicated to their work. Every year, those who had loved them remembered, hoping for closure, for some sign that could explain the unexplainable. And so, the story of Flight 247 began, not with drama or catastrophe, but with a simple morning departure, a routine flight that should have been ordinary. It was ordinary in every way, until the moment it vanished. That moment would ripple through families, communities, and aviation authorities for decades to come. It would spark speculation, hope, grief, and eventually, an astonishing discovery that no one could have imagined. For now, though in the spring of 2001, Flight 247 was simply gone. The engines were silent, the cabin empty, and the world left to wonder. How could 4 experienced airline crew members disappear without a trace? The mystery had begun, quietly and unexpectedly, on a morning that promised only routine. After the disappearance of Flight 247, the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The world struggled to understand what had happened to the 4 airline crew members and the passengers aboard the missing aircraft. Families were left in a state of constant anxiety, their lives caught in a limbo between hope and despair. Every ringing phone, every news bulletin, every unexpected knock at the door sparked a moment of hope that quickly dissolved into crushing disappointment when no answers arrived. The families of the crew were perhaps the most affected. Captain Robert Hayes, wife Linda, spent sleepless nights staring at photographs of her husband, unable to reconcile the calm and confident man she knew with the image of someone lost somewhere, possibly alone and struggling. She remembered how he had kissed her goodbye that morning, assuring her that the flight would be routine. The memory haunted her, She visited the airport every week, talking to air traffic controllers, investigators, and anyone who might have information. Yet every day she left with the same emptiness. Daniel Morris' parents, John and Margaret, faced a different kind of agony. Their son had been ambitious and full of life, always dreaming of flying the skies. He had called them the night before the flight, sharing his excitement for the journey. John often sat in his son's old room, staring at the model planes Daniel had collected, wondering how such a bright life could vanish without a trace. Margaret held on to hope, believing that Daniel and the rest of the crew were still alive somewhere, waiting to be found. Sarah Collins' younger sister, Emily, became her closest confidant. Emily tried to distract her family with small daily routines, but nothing could erase the worry. She remembered Sarah's gentle laughter and her way of calming nervous passengers, traits that made her not only an excellent flight attendant, but a beloved sister and friend. Maria Vega's family, too, struggled with the uncertainty. Her parents clung to the belief that their daughter's resilience and quick thinking might have kept her alive, somewhere hidden, waiting for rescue. The authorities worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Search and rescue teams scoured every possible location along the flight path. Helicopters combed the skies, ground teams explored dense forests, rivers, and mountainous regions. Specialists brought in advanced radar and tracking technology, analyzing every piece of flight data. Despite all these efforts, there was no trace of the aircraft or the crew. The mystery deepened with every passing day. Media attention was intense. News outlets covered the story relentlessly, interviewing family members, aviation experts, and witnesses. The story captured the public's imagination. 4 trained, professional crew members disappearing without a trace on what should have been an ordinary flight. Conspiracy theories emerged almost immediately. Some suggested mechanical failure, while others speculated that the plane had been hijacked or sabotaged. A few even hinted at secret government involvement. The lack of concrete evidence made the theories seem plausible to some, further feeding the public's fascination with the mystery. At the same time, the disappearance of Flight 247 began to take on a strange, almost mythical quality in local communities near the flight path. Villagers who lived near the dense forests told stories of strange lights flickering at night, odd sounds echoing through the trees, and unusual movements among the shadows. These accounts were often dismissed by authorities as folklore, but they persisted in the local culture, adding layers of intrigue and unease to the mystery. Despite the media attention and ongoing searches, official investigations eventually slowed. The airline faced criticism, though internal reviews confirmed that all procedures had been properly followed. Authorities faced the uncomfortable reality that, with no wreckage and no survivors, the case could not be solved through conventional means. Official statements were cautious, describing the flight as lost and unrecoverable. Yet, among the families and the few dedicated investigators who refused to give up, there was a shared conviction that the truth was out there, waiting to be found. As years passed, the story of Flight 247 became part of aviation history, often cited in discussions about unexplained disappearances. The crew's colleagues remembered them fondly, sharing anecdotes of their professionalism, courage, and camaraderie. Stories circulated of Robert's calm decision-making under pressure, Daniel's youthful energy and eagerness to learn, Sarah's compassionate care for passengers, and Maria's sharp attention to detail. These memories humanized the mystery, reminding the world that the disappearance was not just an aviation puzzle, but a tragedy affecting real people with families, dreams, and lives that had been interrupted. During this time, local adventurers and explorers occasionally attempted independent searches. Guided by maps, rumors, and local stories, they ventured deep into the forest, hoping to uncover some clue. Some reported unusual terrain formations, rock shelters, or hollowed trees that seemed large enough to conceal a person or an object. Others claimed to have heard faint echoes or seen distant lights that could not be explained. While none of these findings directly solved the mystery, they kept the legend alive and hinted at the possibility that nature itself might be hiding the answer. Meanwhile, the families carried on with their lives in a fragile state of hope and grief. Anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays were tinged with the absence of their loved ones. Every flight they boarded or watched take off brought memories of the missing crew, each departure a reminder of what had been lost. They joined support groups, connected with other families of missing persons, and shared their pain and hope, forming communities bound by the experience of uncertainty. Psychologists noted the profound effects of such unresolved loss. Families struggled with what experts call ambiguous loss, the torment of not knowing whether to mourn or continue hoping. Children of the missing crew grew up with unanswered questions, imagining scenarios in which their parents were somewhere safe, alive, but unreachable. Parents wrestled with guilt and helplessness, replaying every moment before the disappearance, wondering if they could have done something differently. As the years turned into decades, the story of Flight 247 inspired writers, journalists, and documentarians. Books were written, documentaries produced, and articles published, all exploring the disappearance from different angles. Each retelling added more detail, more emotion, more speculation. Some accounts focused on the human side, the grief of the families, the camaraderie among the crew, and the psychological toll of uncertainty. Others delved into technical aviation theories, examining every possible scenario that could have caused the plane to vanish. Yet, despite the attention and analysis, the most important questions remained unanswered. Where had Flight 247 gone? What had happened to Captain Hayes, Daniel Morris, Sarah Collins, and Maria Vega? And why had the plane, seemingly functioning and intact, disappeared without a trace? These questions haunted not only the families and investigators, but also the wider public, keeping the story alive in newspapers, online forums, and conversations for years. The forest where the plane was believed to have gone missing remained a place of intrigue and fear. It was dense, ancient, and difficult to navigate, with thick canopies that blocked sunlight and twisted paths that could easily disorient even the most experienced explorers. Nature had reclaimed the area over the years, making searches increasingly difficult. Rivers had shifted course, trees had fallen and grown, and soil and vegetation had covered any traces that might once have existed. To most people, it was just a forest. To those who sought answers, it was a labyrinth hiding a secret that had evaded discovery for more than 2 decades. In the absence of concrete evidence, imagination and rumor filled the void. Some people speculated that the crew had survived for a time, trapped in the wilderness, and left messages or signals that were never found. Others imagined them discovering hidden caves, living off the land, and facing unimaginable challenges. While these ideas were speculative, they reflected the human desire to find meaning and closure, to imagine that even in the face of tragedy, survival was possible. Over time, the families began to find solace in small ways. Memorials were established, scholarships created in the crew's names, and community events held to honor their memory. These acts did not erase the pain, but they provided a way to remember and celebrate the lives of those lost. Friends and colleagues continued to share stories, keeping their personalities and achievements alive for future generations. In doing so, they preserved a sense of humanity in a story otherwise dominated by mystery and loss. Despite the passage of time, a quiet hope persisted. Among those who refused to accept the disappearance as a permanent mystery, there was a belief that one day, some piece of evidence would surface. Perhaps a photograph, a note, or a physical clue buried in the forest would finally reveal the truth. This hope sustained families, investigators, and adventurers alike, giving them a reason to continue looking, to continue believing, and to continue remembering. And so, for 24 years, the story of Flight 247 lived in a strange space between reality and legend. It was a story of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, of nature's indifference, of human resilience, and of the enduring power of hope. While the world moved on, those connected to the flight never fully let go, their hearts holding on to the belief that the crew might still be remembered, honored, and perhaps one day understood. 24 years had passed since Flight 247 vanished from radar, leaving no trace of the aircraft or its crew. The world had almost forgotten the details, except for aviation enthusiasts, local historians, and the families who had never stopped hoping for answers. The forest where the plane was believed to have disappeared had grown denser over the decades, with trees and vegetation reclaiming every trace of human presence. It was an almost impenetrable wilderness, a place where even the most experienced explorers would find it difficult to navigate. It was on a crisp autumn morning that a group of hikers decided to explore one of the forest's most untouched regions. They were an ordinary group of friends, motivated by curiosity and a love for nature rather than any specific goal. Among them was Daniel, a history enthusiast who loved uncovering hidden places, and Anna, who had a fascination with local folklore. As they walked deeper into the forest, they noticed how little the area had changed over decades. Fallen trees were covered in moss, thick vines hung from ancient branches, and the air carried the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. After hours of walking, they stumbled upon something unusual. At first, it appeared to be an enormous tree, far larger than any they had seen before. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, with roots twisting into the ground like massive serpents. But as they approached, Daniel noticed a hollow at its base, large enough for a person to enter. It looked natural, yet it seemed as if it had been shaped over time by more than just natural growth. The opening was partially hidden by overgrown bushes, making it nearly invisible to anyone passing by. A chill ran down their spines, a mixture of fear and excitement. Cautiously, they stepped inside the hollow. The air was cooler, carrying a faint smell of earth and wood. Their flashlights revealed what appeared to be remnants of human presence. A few worn blankets, a small metal container, and scattered papers that seemed to have been written in haste. At first, they thought it might have been the shelter of a hiker or a camper who had long ago disappeared. But then they noticed details that suggested something far older and more significant. Among the items were fragments of what appeared to be airline uniforms, faded but recognizable. Daniel picked up a small, worn notebook. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was still legible. It was unmistakably personal, filled with detailed notes describing life in the forest, the challenges faced, and desperate attempts to find safety. The handwriting matched that of the crew members whose photos the hikers had seen in old news articles, confirming what they could hardly believe. They had found evidence connected to Flight 247. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Local authorities and aviation experts were notified, and a team of investigators arrived to carefully examine the site. They were meticulous, documenting every item and photographing the interior of the hollowed tree. It became clear that the crew had survived the initial crash, somehow managing to escape the wreckage and find refuge in the natural cave formed by the tree. The notes provided an insight into their experience, revealing both courage and despair. The pages described days of hunger, struggles to find clean water, and attempts to signal for help using makeshift devices. One passage detailed how they had rationed food and water, relying on supplies salvaged from the plane wreckage and what the forest could provide. The crew had kept track of time, writing entries about the sun, weather, and the hope that rescue teams would find them. Each page revealed their determination to survive, their concern for one another, and their slowly dwindling hope as the days turned into weeks, then months. Investigators discovered that the crew had attempted to leave signals for any passing aircraft or search teams. Pieces of reflective material, carefully positioned, suggested they had hoped someone would see them from above. Small fires had been built in controlled areas, though over time the forest had grown over the evidence. Their ingenuity and courage were remarkable, demonstrating that even in extreme circumstances, they had refused to give up entirely. Yet the notes also revealed the harsh reality. The forest had grown more unforgiving over the years, and survival had become increasingly difficult. Illness, injuries, and exhaustion took their toll. One page described a storm that had flooded part of the shelter, destroying supplies and forcing them to improvise. Another described injuries sustained while attempting to climb out of a ravine in search of food. The crew had endured challenges that would have overwhelmed most people, yet they had remained vigilant, determined to stay alive until help arrived. One particularly haunting entry hinted at the final moments. The handwriting was shaky, the words fragmented, a mixture of fear, resignation, and hope. It suggested that they had been trapped, unable to find a safe exit from the forest despite their best efforts. The pages reflected both bravery and desperation, showing a humanity that was deeply moving. Here were 4 professional crew members, trained to handle emergencies in the sky, now facing the ultimate test of survival on land. with only each other to rely on. As the investigation progressed, forensic experts carefully analyzed the items found in the tree cave. They confirmed that the uniforms, personal effects, and writing materials belonged to Captain Robert Hayes, Daniel Morris, Sarah Collins, and Maria Vega. Small, personal items such as watches, pens, and notebooks provided a tangible connection to the individuals who had been missing for more than 2 decades. Every artifact told a story, offering insight into their lives, personalities, and the harrowing journey they had endured. Local villagers who had lived near the forest all their lives were consulted. Some recalled strange occurrences over the years, unusual sounds, lights flickering in the distance, and glimpses of people moving through dense areas where no paths existed. These stories, once dismissed as folklore or imagination, now gained new significance. It appeared that the crew's presence in the forest had left subtle traces, noticed only by those attuned to the unusual. The combination of natural camouflage and the vastness of the forest had kept them hidden for decades. For the families, the discovery was both heartbreaking and relieving. For years, they had imagined countless scenarios, some hopeful, some tragic. Now they finally had answers, though the truth was far more difficult than anyone could have imagined. The crew had survived the initial disappearance, showing remarkable resilience, only to be ultimately overcome by the harsh conditions of the forest. The evidence offered closure, but it also brought a renewed sorrow as they learned of the struggles their loved ones had endured. Psychologists and grief counselors worked with the families, helping them process the complex emotions stirred by the discovery. There was grief, certainly, but also pride and admiration for the courage displayed by the crew. The story of survival, however brief, became a testament to human resilience, determination, and the will to endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. The discovery also reignited public interest. News outlets reported the findings in detail, highlighting the human story behind the mystery. Readers and viewers were captivated by the account of the crew's ingenuity, courage, and the tragic circumstances of their final days. Aviation historians and survival experts analyzed the notes, offering insights into the decisions the crew had made and the challenges they had faced. Every detail added depth to a story that had once seemed unsolvable, transforming it from an abstract mystery into a deeply human narrative. The tree cave itself became a subject of study. Experts in geology and botany examined how the hollowed tree had formed, understanding how it could have provided shelter for an extended period. They noted that the tree's size, structure, and natural insulation had made it a rare but effective refuge. This natural shelter had protected the crew from the worst of the elements, allowing them to survive longer than might have been expected in such an environment. As the investigation drew to a close, authorities confirmed that the mystery of Flight 247 was finally solved in part. While the crew's final days had been tragic, the evidence showed that they had not simply vanished without a struggle. They had fought for survival, adapted to extreme conditions, and documented their experience with courage and clarity. The human aspect of the story overshadowed the mystery, emphasizing resilience, ingenuity, and the strength of bonds formed under extraordinary circumstances. For families, historians, and the public, the tree cave discovery offered both closure and reflection. It reminded everyone of the fragility of life, the unpredictability of nature, and the remarkable capacity of humans to endure even the harshest challenges. The crew's story, once defined by disappearance and uncertainty, was now defined by courage, determination, and an extraordinary will to survive. The discovery also left lingering questions. How had the crew managed to survive so long without being noticed? What had happened in the final days? How many subtle signs had been overlooked over the decades? While some questions would remain unanswered forever, the tree cave provided the most complete picture possible, transforming decades of speculation into a concrete understanding of what had occurred. And so, the mystery that had haunted aviation history for nearly a quarter of a century finally began to take shape. Flight 247, once considered lost forever, had left behind a story of survival, tragedy, and resilience. The discovery of the tree cave and the crew's belongings revealed that even in the most desperate situations, the human spirit can endure, adapt, and leave behind a record of its struggle. For those who had loved and remembered the crew, The tree cave became a place of reverence, a symbol of courage and humanity that would never be forgotten. The discovery of the tree cave finally brought an end to the decades-long mystery of Flight 247, but for the families, it was only the beginning of a complex journey of emotions. After 24 years of uncertainty, they had answers, yet those answers were both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. The crew had survived the initial disappearance, had endured incredible hardships, and had fought to stay alive against unimaginable odds. And yet, the forest's unforgiving nature had ultimately claimed them. Authorities worked carefully to recover and document the artifacts from the tree cave. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, from tattered airline uniforms to notebooks filled with the crew's detailed notes. Forensic experts analyzed the handwriting, the contents of the notes, and even traces of food and water sources used by the crew. It became clear that the 4 airline employees had survived the initial crash and had managed to adapt to the harsh forest environment. They had rationed supplies, maintained makeshift shelter, and attempted signals to attract attention from potential rescuers. The personal notebooks were the most compelling evidence of their journey. They contained not only practical details about survival, but also intimate reflections. Captain Robert Hayes wrote about his responsibility for the safety of the crew and passengers, the decisions he had to make under pressure, and the hope that someone, somewhere, would find them. Daniel Morris, the young co-pilot, wrote about his longing for home, his admiration for his mentor, and the determination that kept him moving forward. Sarah Collins described her concern for the passengers she could no longer tend to, her efforts to maintain morale among the crew, and her unwavering hope that rescue would come. Maria Vega's entries detailed her observations of the environment, her clever methods to gather food and water, and the support she gave to her colleagues in the face of growing despair. As investigators pieced together the timeline from these notebooks, a clearer picture emerged. The crew had survived the crash by managing to reach the natural tree cave, which provided shelter from rain, cold, and wildlife. They had worked together to ration supplies salvaged from the wreckage and from the forest, attempting to signal passing aircraft with reflective surfaces and controlled fires. They faced injuries, exhaustion, and illness but supported each other tirelessly, demonstrating resilience, teamwork, and courage. Despite their efforts, the forest's dense and ever-changing terrain made rescue impossible. The natural landscape hid them completely, even from aerial searches, while storms and shifting vegetation destroyed many of the signals they had attempted to create. Their final entries hinted at an increasing awareness of the limits of their situation, yet they remained dignified, thoughtful, and caring for one another to the end. The emotional weight in their words was palpable, a testament to their humanity in extreme circumstances. For the families, reading these notes was both painful and meaningful. The reality was far harsher than any hope they had clung to, yet it provided a sense of closure. They could finally understand the bravery and resilience their loved ones had shown. The grief they felt was profound, but it was accompanied by admiration and pride. Here were people who had faced unimaginable circumstances, yet had acted with courage, dignity, and humanity. Memorial services were organized near the site of the tree cave, with the families, investigators, and local communities coming together to honor the crew. Speeches recounted the crew's professionalism, compassion, and bravery. Their personal belongings, carefully preserved, were displayed as a tribute to their struggle and survival. The tree cave itself became a symbolic site, a place where visitors could reflect on human courage, the power of nature, and the enduring importance of hope. The story of Flight 247 also inspired people far beyond the families and investigators. Writers, journalists, and documentary makers covered the discovery extensively. The narrative of survival, the ingenuity of the crew, and the tragic conclusion captivated audiences worldwide. Experts in aviation, survival, and psychology examined the crew's actions, drawing lessons from their experience. These discussions emphasized preparation, resilience, teamwork, and the human capacity to endure extreme adversity. Psychologists noted that the crew's notebooks offered insight not only into survival strategies, but also into the emotional and mental processes involved in coping with prolonged uncertainty. The crew had maintained hope, supported each other emotionally, and continued to document their experience with clarity. Their ability to stay connected and positive in the most difficult circumstances was remarkable, offering valuable lessons for understanding human endurance. Communities near the forest were deeply affected as well. Villagers who had grown up hearing stories of strange lights and unusual sounds now realized the truth behind their local folklore. They shared tales passed down over generations, recounting the eerie experiences they had witnessed without understanding their source. The discovery of the tree cave transformed these stories from superstition to historical record, giving the local population a sense of participation in solving the long-standing mystery. For the aviation industry, the discovery prompted reflection on safety, search protocols, and the challenges of locating aircraft in remote areas. While the disappearance had been considered nearly impossible to explain, the discovery highlighted the need for advanced tracking technology, better emergency protocols, and a deeper understanding of natural environments that could hide wreckage. It also reminded pilots, crews, and airlines of the unpredictable nature of aviation and the importance of preparedness and teamwork in the face of unexpected events. For the families, however, the discovery offered something far more personal than lessons or industry reflection. It provided closure. They could finally imagine the final months of their loved ones' lives, not as an endless void of uncertainty, but as a testament to their courage, ingenuity, and loyalty to one another. They could grieve fully, knowing the truth, and could celebrate the lives their loved ones had lived and the bravery they had shown in the forest. Memorial services continued to honor the crew's memory. Schools and community organizations established scholarships and educational programs in their names, teaching future generations about aviation, teamwork, resilience, and courage. The story of Flight 247 became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of human endurance, a narrative of hope, struggle, and dignity in the face of overwhelming adversity. Even as the public moved on from the initial news, the lessons of Flight 247 endured. Books were written detailing the crew's survival, the notes recovered from the tree cave, and the painstaking investigation that finally revealed the truth. Documentaries highlighted the human side of the story, focusing on the relationships between the crew members, their struggles, and the strength they drew from one another. Every retelling reinforced the narrative of courage and perseverance. The emotional impact on the families was profound. They spoke publicly about the significance of understanding what had happened. While the reality was tragic, it allowed them to honor the crew properly. They were able to move forward with their lives while keeping the memory of their loved ones alive. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers joined in memorial events, reflecting on the lessons of survival, hope, and humanity. The tree cave itself remained protected, with local authorities and conservation groups ensuring that it was preserved as a historical and natural site. Visitors were allowed under controlled circumstances, giving people the chance to connect with the story, reflect on human resilience, and appreciate the natural environment that had both challenged and sheltered the crew. The cave became a place of reflection, learning, and remembrance, a powerful reminder of the thin line between life and death, hope and despair. In the end, Flight 247's story became one of human courage and resilience, rather than just mystery. The crew's dedication, ingenuity, and care for one another transformed a tragedy into a powerful example of the human spirit. Families could finally honor their loved ones with full understanding. The public could learn from the story, and aviation history was enriched with knowledge that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. The legacy of Flight 247 lived on in the memories of those who loved the crew, the communities that preserved their story, and the countless people inspired by their resilience. It was a story that began with a routine flight, vanished into mystery, and ultimately revealed the extraordinary strength of human courage when confronted with nature's challenges. Even decades later, the memory of the crew remained vivid. Their notebooks, photographs, and personal items were preserved in museums and archives, ensuring that their story would continue to inspire future generations. Flight 247, once lost to history, had finally found its place as a tale of heroism, endurance, and the enduring power of hope in the face of overwhelming odds.